Yeah, I don't think we.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Akron Public Schools Legal Contract and Policy Committee meeting this evening. First order of business is to review the previous meeting minutes. Is there any questions, concerns, or changes in the minutes? Any corrections, comments, change to the minutes? Hearing none, we will move on. Next order of business, is there anyone to address the board public participation? Anyone to address the board for public participation? No public participation. So what we'll do now, we will move on to our next topic, which is discussion of some policies. And at this time, I will turn it over to Ms. Carter.
All right, so our first policy that's in the first read is our dress and grooming. Is there any discussion around dress and grooming? I know that we had made some slight changes to our dress and grooming policy, and Dr. Lash is here for if you have any questions regarding the dress and grooming.
What were the changes? What were they related to?
Good evening.
Good evening.
The changes, sorry, I'm juggling two laptops here, and this one is here projected. So I'm going to scroll down to shoes. So the highlighted part there in green is the addition that was added to the policy that talks about closed-toed shoes, rubber clogs, that as long as they're worn with an adjustable strap, they would be permitted. And so you might recall some time ago when we talked about Crocs, we have a good love of Crocs. And so that provision there allows for Crocs as long as they are worn with the strap.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So that's in its first read. And then next we have our school uniform policy that is up for repeal. I don't know if you remember, Dr. Lash was here at one of our policy meetings, and she gave us some data regarding the surveys that were sent out, and the majority of staff, parents, students are for not using uniform. We haven't worn uniforms since COVID, and so this is what brought on us looking at our dress and grooming policy and updating that policy. And so we are on the first read of the repeal for school uniforms.
Any questions on the uniform policy, the repeal?
Old business. This is a new policy that we have drafted, and we have taken some information from other districts, from SHRM, and put our nepotism policy. This is just a draft again, and we would decide if we're going to move this to a first read for the next meeting. And so, Haley, did you have anything on the nepotism policy?
We don't have anything additional at this time, but this is a policy for the committee's review that is a version that is from Cleveland Metropolitan School District. Currently, there's not a nepotism policy on our books. We do have a conflict of interest policy. So any comments are welcome, and we can take those into account and redline, unless there's anything else I'm missing, Ms. Carter.
Oh, nope, that was it. And so we'll still continue to flush through this particular policy as it relates to specifically around the, in addition, an individual may, in the second paragraph, 1, 2, 3, third line down, It says, in addition, an individual may not be assigned or accept employment in a department in which a supervisory authority and/or responsibility directly affecting that department is provided by a family member of that individual. So this was a conversation with our internal committee as relates to that particular line and just really trying to define what that means. And so I don't know if we want to have just a little discussion around that as we take this back and continue to work on this policy. So as you read that, what does that mean to you?
To me, Ms. Carter, this would mean that you could not have a person that you're supervising be a relative of yours, and therefore it's almost like having a spouse or someone who you are supervising, and you probably shouldn't be supervising them. They should probably be under the supervision of someone else. So when I read this, that's what I look at.
And so are you referring to just a direct report, or are you referring to like a line of authority?
To me, it would be like a direct report.
Okay.
You know, because I think if you're talking about a direct report, I don't think no one should be supervising a spouse or a relative or anything. Now, but if you talk about the chain, that's a little different because you're going to have a number of people probably who work in different departments and so forth to may have someone who's in the line there, but they're not directly supervising them, and maybe not even indirectly supervising them.
Correct. So that's what we discussed as well. Pastor Harrison?
Mine was related to the next. I'll wait till you get to the next sentence.
Okay. And so the next sentence is employees who become related as a result of marriage, their own or that of a relative, will be transferred to another department or school when possible.
Yes. And I guess I would look at the feasibility of, let's say, there's one of you. There's one chief of staff.
Right.
Okay, and I'm just using that. But a lot of times there's not a lot of this particular skill set. And so is it doable to move someone as a result of marriage? And it may be, but then in a case where it's not feasible.
Right.
Okay, and so I don't want us to lock ourselves into a absolute one of you have to go when we need both of you.
Absolutely. And I think that's the when possible kind of helps that particular, and we had that conversation. Mr. Wamas, I didn't know if you wanted to speak on anything around the nepotism policy or what your thoughts are regarding this draft.
Good evening. I think key to what you're indicating is that's why I think that terminology is in there about when possible.
Okay.
Because there may be circumstances where we can't immediately do that at that point, but we can then make sure that what we will look at is what are other measures we can put into place to ensure that there is appropriate interaction between the employees that are spouses or relatives.
So with the policy, is it practical to kind of outline that, you know, that if it's not possible, if something is not possible, maybe a line that says all, some legal language to say, you know, when it's not possible, we'll put safeguards in place.
To address, kind of like spell out what the safeguards are?
Well, just the fact that you know, I don't think we can spell out exactly safeguards, but just to say that we acknowledge this and that there are safeguards in place, or we acknowledge that this is not feasible or possible to move this person, but we are making sure that we have these walls in place or something, just to acknowledge, you know. So if I come back and say, well, you did move this person, you know, or, you know, such and such at, you know, the garage, you know, they got married and you didn't move them. Okay, well, you may not know, but we did put safeguards in place. So I guess just to kind of give us some flexibility in the policy to say we acknowledge that this potentially could be a conflict, but we also have put safeguards in place. As to not back us into a policy of absolutes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and just to kind of talk about that as well, could that probably be part of an administrative guideline? So it can be in there, you have here's your policy that you're stating, but in your administrative guidelines, it explains more so that you don't, as Reverend Harrison is saying, that we don't box ourselves in. Because I hate to have a policy where you're boxing us in and all of a sudden now you're causing staff to violate your own policies. But if you have a policy like this here and you put administrative guideline to it, that will probably help it and explain so everyone knows the process and what it means as far as definition.
And we do have, in some of our policies, we do make note to the administrative guideline.
Yeah, I was just going to say, yeah, definitely something, good feedback for us to look at further language. And as well, I think definitely our administrative guidelines typically flush those things out a little bit more clearly than as well. Very good.
Thank you. So we'll take this back and continue to work on this policy, and then definitely work on administrative guidelines too to go along with this particular policy. New business, we have House Bill 8. And Haley is just going to give us this is a huge bill, and this brings in religious instruction is a part of this particular bill. But Haley is going to just give us a summary of the bill.
So we will need to have a policy on the books by July 1st, 2025 that covers the provisions of House Bill 8. It creates the Parents' Bill of Rights under a new revised code section, which will require the board to create a policy that upholds parents' rights in their children's upbringing, education, and care. So the policy must include sexuality instruction, parental notification as to any changes in student services or well-being, which is meant to reinforce the rights of the parent to access education and health records. It'll also involve communication restrictions, which will prohibit school staff from discouraging parental involvement or withholding information about a student's well-being. It would also include provisions as to healthcare services, requiring parental authorization for healthcare services, with annual notices about available services, as well as parental opt-outs. And then that realm also covers emergency care and services under an IEP and a 50 or a 504 plan. It will also establish a process for parents to come with concerns with school administrators with the right to appeal decisions up to the board. There's also a portion in this which will prohibit school districts or third parties acting on behalf of the school district from providing instruction that includes sexuality content to children in K through third grade. And then as to religious instruction, we recently took a look at our attendance policy, and there was some new there are some changes to the revised code as to school boards allowing students to be excused for religious instruction days if there are conditions met. There were certain options involved in that original drafting of the revised code, and now that language has been tightened up. So we'll work on revising the policy to reflect House Bill 8 to the extent that will be necessary. And then I know that we're also planning on bringing back the attendance policies for the sake of clarity in certain language. There were certain parts of the policy, we just recently looked at it. I don't know if the committee would recall. Ms. Carter, when was that? That was fairly recent, the attendance policy revision. Maybe a couple months ago, but
Yeah, it was definitely this school year that we looked at the attendance policy, and we will be bringing it back.
great. So we'll be taking a look to put some clarifying language, and then also to make sure that we are compliant with House Bill 8 for the attendance policy. So that's a lot of information, but the point is that we're monitoring it, and we're going to do our best to ensure that every policy that needs to be on the books by July 1 is there.
Yes. So that was just to give you some pre-information as we work through getting this together, because like Haley said, this has to be on our books by July 1st.
I have a question on this.
Any questions about House Bill 8 or
We
discussion?
hit House Bill 8 then. Yeah, I have a question with the, in regards to the release time, and I was unclear. I was kind of listening to the general sessions. Some conversation was had. Is the school responsible for transport or no?
No, parents or the religious organization that we work with would be responsible to transport
Okay.
their student. And it would have to be during lunch or electives. And we would make sure that the student would be able to make up that work from that elective that they miss.
Okay. Thank you.
Question as well. When you say that the religious institution could transport them, is there something that we will have in place to say that we're not liable during that time, so that we don't be, if something happens, that we don't get put in a situation where we have to deal with something?
Absolutely. We were talking about that in our committee meeting, that we would definitely have to have some type of permission slip that the parent signs as it relates to them allowing us to release their child to the religious organization.
Okay, perfect. And there was another question, Pastor, you had? Or-
Yeah, as far as the old business, do we have an update on the independent contractors?
The vendor policy, that's
vendor
on,
policy,
that's actually
yeah.
on it's in my book right here, that it's going to be under number 6 as it relates to what we're going to be bringing
Oh,
next
okay,
to the next
okay.
meeting. So
Okay.
to the next meeting, we're going to be bringing policy 5200, an update on the attendance policy, as Haley spoke about. Also, policy 5780, which is student rights and parent rights. Policy 6320, which is purchasing. Policy 6460, vendor policy. Policy 7540.04, which is staff technology acceptable use and safety. These are all mandatory updates, just so that you guys know that as well. And then also policy 8310, which is public records policy. And then we have a list of mandatory updates from the that we have to have in place as relates to our Office of School Improvement. So this is going to be another list. And these are all mandatory updates and small changes to our current policies that we'll be bringing back. Policy number 2120, School Improvement. Policy 2261.01, parent participation in Title I programs. Policy 2111, parent involvement. Policy 2261, Title I services. Policy 511101. That's our homeless policy. Policy 6325. It's procurement, federal grants policy. Policy 2623A,
2623?
2623. A, testing program. These are all federal updates that we are mandated to update. 2623B, security provisions for statewide assessment and test. Security provisions for statewide assessments and tests. And then policy 511103, children and youth in foster care. Children and youth in foster care, 511103.03.
So we had 511101 and 03?
5111.03. I apologize for that.
Yes, but.
So it's just one, 5111.
Oh, okay, so
Yeah.
okay,
So 5111.03.
okay.
And put that decimal in there. And so for the next meeting, we'll have a second read for our dress and grooming, our school uniforms. We'll be looking at our nepotism policy again and refining that, and hopefully we can get that to a first read. And then we'll be looking at these mandatory updates.
I have a question on the updates.
All right, Pastor Harris, go ahead.
I have a question on the updates, on the mandatory updates. Are we looking to update all of these at one time? And when you say the mandatory updates, is this something that we, I'm trying to wrap my head around so many updates at one time.
Well, I think that we'll need to look, we can look and see if these are all mandatory as it relates to, like through legislation telling us that we have to do these things. And so some of them do have timelines on them. And so we can look to see which ones, maybe we can narrow back on some based on when they said the deadline is, where we have to have it into effect. But I do know these OSI ones, these school improvement ones, we need to get in right away.
Yeah.
So for sure, these would definitely need to be on there.
Okay.
And then we can look at these other ones to see if we can push some of these out in a different month, but we'd have to look to see the deadline.
And I'm not asking to push any back. I just want to make sure that we have time to review them.
Right.
And so if you bring them, let's, possibly put the date that we have to
Have it done.
have it done. Yeah, because there's a lot to update at one time. And so I would really like the opportunity to kind of understand or ask questions. But I understand the mandatory updates, we don't have, there's not a lot of conversation to have over those.
Right.
So I do understand that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me, just as a thought, maybe we can prioritize them by date. So for example, let's say we need to have, in February, we have these that need to be done. So you can say, here's what we're going to do maybe through February to try to get them passed. Then February, March, April, and prioritize them according to the time that they need to be mandated. And then some of the others, we might be able to just push back, and when we can get them in the flow, put them in the flow so we can work on those as well. That way it'll save you some time, 'cause that's a lot of mandatory. But the ones that we really need to have right away, them the ones we probably should throw in there right away and then work our way back. But maybe we can plan a schedule. Okay. Thank you. Is there anything else for the good of the order today?
For the
Pastor
minutes. Yeah, and I know we don't, I've asked the treasurer, and I'm trying to find out what contracts we deal with. I had a conversation with the attorney, so we're trying to figure out, we're not trying to figure out. I'm just trying to locate. We have a lot of construction that is going to occur. So I'm trying to ascertain as to how those contracts are vetted?
So we do have an internal contract review committee, and we basically, so next week, actually, we're going to be interviewing for our contract manager at risk. And so we do our interviews, and then once that's finished, then as a committee, we sit and we look at the different applicants. And then, so it's an internal process that takes place for review of the contracts.
Okay, yeah, I understand that part. And I mean, but at some point, the board has to say yay or nay. And at what place in that process does the board have a chance to take a look at? I mean, we're not going to understand well, I don't think anybody really, other than the contract people, we're going to understand. I mean, the construction people, we're not going to understand all the facets of the contract, of the construction, but there should be some due diligence on the part of the board before we approve something. And so I'm just looking for at what point in that process do we take a look at it?
I can, we'll need to, as it relates to, because everything is like a timeline when it comes to this construction, and there's so many RFQs, RFPs, and everything that we're putting out for bids for different projects. And so I will work with our Business Affairs Department as well as Mr. Keenan, who's over our construction projects, to look at how do we intertwine bringing some of that through either committees, through some of our committees, or I don't know, it might have to be a board meeting depending on how it falls within the timeline. So I will definitely work with them and find out how that could be done.
And I would suggest that the timeline should follow the board, and not to suggest that anything should stop, but it may stop if the board don't have adequate information to make an informed decision. And so I guess that's where I'm trying to get to in a committee. Where are we taking a look at this, and so we don't come to a Monday meeting and vote no on something that has a critical timeline. And so that's the goal is to prevent that from happening. And so I'm just saying we need to, adhere to the timelines, but we also need to adhere to the board has a responsibility of voting yay or nay.
Absolutely.
Anything else for the good of the order? Nothing? Okay. Well, at this point, we will adjourn this committee meeting and thank everyone who may have been on watching and those who are here to participate. Everyone have a great evening.